Picture this. You're wandering through the bustling streets of ancient Rome in the year 67 AD when something stops you cold. There, in the heart of the Forum, the Emperor Nero strides proudly with what seems to be his new bride, a breathtaking young woman adorned in silk and glittering jewels. But behind them, whispers ripple through the crowd because the shocking truth is widely known. That woman walking beside the most powerful man on earth was once a boy named Sporus. And what Nero did to him stands as one of the most chilling examples of psychological and physical abuse ever recorded. Before we delve into these buried accounts of endurance and torment, if you're someone who enjoys uncovering the hidden sides of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content like it. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. It's truly amazing that we can explore these ancient stories together, connected through time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. What you're about to hear isn't simply another account of Roman indulgence. This is a tale of how unchecked power can twist love into fixation, sorrow into insanity, and a living person into a breathing puppet fashioned to fulfill one man's dark desires. You may not recognize the name Sporus now, but his story will linger in your thoughts long after you've heard it. Let's begin with the man who orchestrated this tragic saga. Nero wasn't inherently monstrous. In truth, the early days of his rule showed great potential. When he took power at the age of just 16, many Roman citizens believed they were witnessing the beginning of a golden era. He lowered taxes, supported public festivities, and even acted on stage in performances that captivated the masses. But absolute power tends to erode even the brightest of minds. By 65 AD, something had shifted deep within the emperor's psyche. Perhaps it was the ever-present fear that those closest to him secretly longed for his crown. Perhaps it was the crushing loneliness of being the one man in an empire of 60 million who could never be opposed, never corrected, never told no. Or perhaps it stemmed from the loss of the one person he claimed to love more than anything. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she embodied everything Nero believed he desired in a partner: beauty that defied description, intellect sharp enough to mirror his own grand ambitions, and a drive that matched his hunger for everlasting fame. But Poppaea was far more than a beautiful figure at court. She wielded a keen political acumen that made her either a powerful ally or a dangerous adversary. When Nero first encountered Poppaea, he was still married to Octavia, daughter of the previous emperor. It was a cold, loveless union born of political necessity. Poppaea stood in stark contrast. Where Octavia was subdued and reserved, Poppaea was lively and commanding. Where Octavia shunned attention, Poppaea thrived in its spotlight. The relationship between Nero and Poppaea began as just another scandal in Roman high society. But what initially appeared to be a typical affair quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous: a consuming fixation. Nero wasn't merely captivated by Poppaea's looks. He became utterly obsessed with her, in a way that alarmed even his most trusted confidants. Historical accounts from the time portray Nero's conduct during this phase as increasingly volatile and possessive. He would erupt in fits of violent anger if any man lingered on Poppaea with his gaze during public events. He placed guards around her at all hours, not for her safety, but to surveil her every move. He showered her with extravagant gifts that drained the imperial treasury: Indian gemstones, Chinese silks, and Arabian perfumes. But perhaps the clearest sign of his obsession was how he began bending reality to serve it. First, he cast aside Octavia in a dramatic divorce that alienated a large segment of his support base. Then, he declared his intent to marry Poppaea in a grand imperial ceremony. The wedding was a display of unmatched extravagance, with Nero sparing no cost to prove his adoration. Yet, even marriage didn't quell Nero's need to dominate Poppaea entirely. He began cutting her off from her loved ones, replacing them with courtiers whose loyalty depended solely on his patronage. He commissioned countless portraits and statues of her, not just for public admiration, but to decorate his private quarters, allowing him to gaze upon her likeness even when she wasn't present. Ancient chroniclers recount how Nero would sometimes spend hours silently observing Poppaea as she went about her daily routine. This wasn't an act of romantic longing. It was the unsettling behavior of someone who had conflated affection with possession, who viewed a living person as a prized artifact created solely for his satisfaction. Poppaea, for her part, seemed acutely aware of the dangerous tightrope she was walking. She understood that her appearance and Nero's infatuation gave her immense influence, but also that this power was built on unstable ground. She began leveraging her position to elevate her family's status, constructing a network of allies who could offer protection if Nero's feelings ever cooled. However, Poppaea possessed one critical vulnerability. She wasn't afraid to confront Nero. Unlike most of the imperial court, who had learned to adapt to the emperor's volatile moods, Poppaea maintained a fierce independence. She would openly challenge him on matters of state, critique his artistic endeavors, and even ridicule his performances when she found them lacking. Accounts of what transpired on that fateful day in 65 AD differed depending on the ancient source, but the result is always the same. What began as an ordinary domestic quarrel, some say it stemmed from Nero returning late from chariot races, others claim it was about his theatrical ambitions, ended in a moment of uncontrollable fury that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Tacitus records that the conflict intensified when Poppaea dared to question Nero's sense of duty, accusing him of caring more about public acclaim than about being a devoted husband and father. At the time, she was pregnant with what would have been their second child, and perhaps the strain of pregnancy made her less tolerant of Nero's deteriorating behavior. What followed has been the subject of scholarly debate for generations, but most historians agree on the core detail. In a fit of uncontrollable fury, Nero either kicked or struck his pregnant wife with such savage force that it caused fatal internal injuries. Some accounts speak of a single, devastating blow to her abdomen. Others recount a prolonged assault that left her bleeding and unconscious on the cold marble floor. Picture the instant Nero grasped the magnitude of his actions. The man who ruled over 30 legions, who could sentence anyone to death with a mere command, who was revered as a deity in parts of the empire, had just obliterated the one person he truly cherished. The woman who had consumed his every thought was dying by his own hand, the victim of his unchecked rage. Contemporary sources portray the aftermath as one of the most humiliating episodes in the empire's history. Nero is said to have collapsed over Poppaea's broken body, alternating between desperate pleas for forgiveness and issuing frantic orders for her to survive, as though his imperial power could somehow override the finality of death. He summoned Rome's finest doctors, offering them vast sums to save her, and threatening torture if they failed. But it was hopeless. Poppaea succumbed within hours, along with the unborn child who might have been his successor. In that instant, something irreparable fractured in Nero's psyche. His sorrow went beyond personal grief. It marked a total detachment from reality. His mourning became infamous throughout the empire. Defying Roman tradition, he refused to have Poppaea's body cremated. Instead, he had her embalmed and interred in a mausoleum that rivaled those of Rome's greatest emperors. He proclaimed her a goddess, instituted a state cult in her name, and reportedly spent hours conversing with her corpse, convinced she could still hear him. The atmosphere in the imperial palace became even more perilous. Members of the court were now compelled to indulge Nero's delusion, speaking of Poppaea in the present tense and preserving her favorite seat at royal banquets. Anyone who dared suggest the emperor should move forward faced immediate exile, or a more brutal fate. It was during this period that Sporus came into Nero's view, completely unaware that he was stepping into a waking nightmare. Likely 14 or 15 years old, Sporus had been born into slavery within the imperial household, and later manumitted as a child. Raised behind palace walls, he received an education designed to prepare him for administrative service. This role, while technically that of a freedman, was considered a privileged one. Freed individuals in imperial service often lived under better conditions than many freeborn citizens of lower rank. However, that privilege came at a steep cost: absolute dependency on the emperor's goodwill. Freedmen were bound by gratitude to their former masters, leaving them totally exposed. They could rise to prominence or be cast aside, punished or executed, at the emperor's whim, with no legal protections. What drew Nero to Sporus wasn't his intellect or training, it was his appearance. Multiple ancient sources note the boy's striking resemblance to the late Poppaea, especially in the eyes and delicate facial structure. In a culture where Romans often believed physical likeness hinted at spiritual continuity, this similarity would have seemed eerie, even otherworldly. The first time Nero laid eyes on Sporus after Poppaea's death, something shifted in the shattered depths of the emperor's mind. Here, standing before him, was what seemed like a second chance, an opportunity to undo the irreversible, to resurrect what he had destroyed. The resemblance was so uncanny that, for a fleeting moment, Nero may have truly believed he was witnessing Poppaea's spirit returned in flesh. There was, of course, a glaring complication. Sporus was male. But for a man who believed himself divine, who had spent months speaking to a corpse, altering someone's gender felt like a trivial hurdle. What followed would become one of history's most deliberate and devastating examples of cruelty. Nero didn't merely command Sporus to wear women's clothing, he resolved to make the transformation absolute. The emperor summoned Rome's most skilled physicians and ordered them to carry out a surgical procedure designed to permanently feminize the young man's body. This wasn't just physical mutilation, it was a calculated annihilation of Sporus's identity. The operation was invasive, agonizing, and potentially fatal, often ending in death due to infection or hemorrhage. And even if Sporus survived, his life would be irrevocably altered. He would never be able to have children, never form a conventional romantic relationship, never again be recognized as fully male in Roman society. The surgery was carried out in the imperial palace, inside rooms specially prepared for the task. Roman medical practices were primitive, utilizing basic tools and rudimentary anesthetics. The ordeal would have lasted for hours and been excruciating. Sporus would have been physically restrained as physicians approached with their crude instruments, his cries for mercy ignored, his fate already decided. After weeks, possibly months of recovery, Nero made an announcement that sent shockwaves through even the most jaded circles of Roman nobility. He would marry Sporus in an official imperial wedding. The preparations were lavish and protracted, devouring vast resources. Sporus was given a new identity, Sabina, the name of the deceased empress, and relocated to a private wing of the palace to begin his transformation in earnest. Imperial tailors designed elaborate gowns tailored to his altered body, crafted to conceal any remnants of his masculinity and enhance the illusion of femininity. Jewelers created intricate adornments just for him, many of which incorporated stones that had once belonged to Poppaea. These were more than decorative items. They were symbolic chains, physical tokens linking him to the woman he had been forced to become. Cosmetic specialists trained him in the art of makeup. They taught him how to widen his eyes with kohl, how to redden his cheeks with rouge, how to soften his face using powders. But these lessons weren't simply about enhancing appearance. They were acts of psychological conditioning, tools designed to erase his former self, to overwrite the boy named Sporus with the ghost of a woman who no longer existed. Hairdressers trained him in the intricate styling methods popular among elite Roman women. His hair was cut, curled, and arranged into elaborate designs, often adorned with costly decorations. This process could occupy hours each day, requiring several attendants and metal tools heated over flames. Yet, perhaps the most psychologically corrosive aspect was the instruction in feminine mannerisms and conduct. Sporus was assigned mentors who taught him how to move and behave in ways deemed appropriate for women of high status. He learned how to place his hands, how to sit with composure, how to adjust his garments when seated, and how to navigate rooms with a sense of grace rather than assertive masculinity. Speech coaches worked intensively with him to alter his vocal expression, training him to adopt a higher pitch and speak with the verbal cues associated with women's language patterns. This may have been the most difficult transformation of all, as vocal habits are deeply rooted and resistant to change. Try to grasp the scale of the psychological torment inflicted during this metamorphosis. Each day, Sporus was compelled to stare into mirrors reflecting an unfamiliar version of himself. Every lesson reinforced the idea that his original identity was being erased piece by piece. Every ring, brooch, or necklace that once belonged to Poppaea became another symbolic link in the chain, binding him to a persona he never agreed to inhabit. The wedding was set for the spring of 67 AD, strategically aligned with major religious festivals to add a layer of sanctity and grandeur. Nero spared no effort, treating the event with the seriousness and opulence befitting a genuine imperial marriage. The ceremony unfolded in the grandest hall of the palace, festooned with exotic flowers and lit by thousands of flickering oil lamps. Traditional musicians filled the air with wedding melodies, while servers distributed the finest wines and rarest delicacies. To the uninitiated observer, the spectacle may have appeared like any state wedding, but those who understood the truth knew they were witnessing something deeply abnormal and unsettling. Here was the ruler of the known world, ceremoniously marrying a surgically altered teenage boy, dressed in the likeness of his dead wife. The rituals followed every Roman tradition: the exchange of vows, the clasping of right hands, the sharing of consecrated bread, and the signing of formal documents. The guests performed their roles expertly, offering warm congratulations and valuable gifts, all while masking the discomfort and confusion brewing beneath the surface. The atmosphere must have pulsed with a strange mixture of awe, unease, and the forced politeness required in the presence of unchecked power. After the wedding, Nero accorded Sporus all the honors of a legitimate empress. The young man received a dedicated household staff, private chambers within the palace, and a personal allowance drawn from the imperial treasury. He was provided with a ceremonial litter for public appearances, a stable of horses, and a carefully curated entourage. Yet all this apparent splendor came at a harrowing cost: the complete obliteration of Sporus's former self and the unrelenting burden of maintaining a soul-crushing charade. Sporus was required to accompany Nero to official events, share his table at imperial banquets, and present himself as the loving wife in every public and private moment. This wasn't mere theater. Nero truly appeared to believe that he had revived Poppaea through Sporus. He addressed the young man by her name, recounted memories from a life Sporus had never lived, and demanded answers that preserved the illusion. Each day was a perilous performance, where the tiniest slip could lead to punishment or worse. Sporus had to master not only the outward behaviors expected of a woman, but also embody Poppaea's persona, complete with fabricated memories and a shared history that never existed. When Nero recalled episodes from his marriage, Sporus was expected to react as though he had personally experienced them. Ancient accounts describe how Sporus grew remarkably adept at this deception, seemingly able to sense and respond to Nero's emotional fluctuations with uncanny precision. But they also note a deepening sadness in him, a withdrawal into himself even as he flawlessly performed the role in public. The mental toll was unimaginable. Every day, Sporus awoke in chambers designed to evoke a woman he had never known. Every glance in the mirror revealed a reflection that no longer matched his inner identity. Every conversation required sustained improvisation, assuming memories and emotions that had no basis in his own life. For over 2 years, Sporus endured this surreal existence. But his nightmare only escalated when Nero decided to embark on a cultural tour of Greece. Convinced of his artistic genius, the emperor sought recognition at the great Greek festivals, believing that at last he would receive the acclaim he craved. Naturally, Sporus accompanied him, presented to foreign dignitaries as Rome's empress. One can only imagine the confusion of Greek elites confronted with the sight of their Roman overlord parading a teenage boy in a woman's attire, insisting all treat the absurd fiction as solemn fact. By 68 AD, however, Nero's extravagances and neglect of duty had sparked a wave of rebellion. Provincial governors rose in revolt, incensed by the emperor's erratic rule. The Praetorian Guard turned against him, and the Senate officially declared Nero a public enemy. In his final days, as chaos overtook the capital, Nero fled with a small entourage, including Sporus, the one constant in his unraveling world. Even at the edge of ruin, the emperor clung to his constructed Poppaea. They took refuge in a countryside villa, anxiously awaiting rescue or capture, while Nero swung between grandiose escape fantasies and elaborate rehearsals for his own death. When word arrived that their enemies were closing in, Nero ultimately chose suicide over the humiliation of arrest. But in ending his life, he left Sporus dangerously exposed. Now, a symbol of the fallen regime, Sporus became both a potential pawn and a troubling reminder of imperial excess. Vulnerable in a world eager to erase all traces of Nero's rule. What unfolded afterward was arguably even more heartbreaking. Sporus turned into a political instrument, handed from one influential figure to the next like a prized possession. He was first taken by Nymphidius Sabinus, then by Otho, and finally by Vitellius, each of whom treated him in a similar fashion to Nero, insisting he remain in female attire and referring to him as Poppaea. Under Vitellius, Sporus's torment reached its final horrific stage. The new emperor planned to use him as public spectacle in the Colosseum, staging mythological reenactments designed to inflict both violence and shame. For Sporus, this marked the lowest depth of degradation, to be sexually debased in full view of thousands for their entertainment. Rather than endure this last violation, Sporus made the only autonomous decision he had been allowed in years. He ended his life, most likely by ingesting poison, sometime in 69 AD. He was likely no older than 20 at the time. Through death, Sporus finally freed himself from the grotesque masquerade that had consumed his existence. His life story came to symbolize the perils of unchecked power and the heavy toll of imperial indulgence. Yet, ancient chroniclers showed limited interest in Sporus as a human being, instead presenting him mainly as an emblem of Rome's moral collapse. What renders his story so haunting is not only the abuse he endured, but the deliberate erasure of his identity and will. From the instant Nero decided Sporus resembled Poppaea, the young man ceased to be a person in his own right and was transformed into a blank surface for the emperor's twisted projections. That Sporus chose suicide over further public disgrace implies that beneath the layers of coerced femininity and imperial manipulation, a fragment of his true self remained. His death was both a heartbreaking loss and a final resistance, a refusal to be further violated, even at the cost of his life. Perhaps the saddest truth is that we know almost nothing of who Sporus truly was before this transformation. What dreams did he harbor? What path did he hope to follow? All of it was wiped away when he became Nero's imitation of Poppaea, replaced by a performance so thorough that his original self vanished completely. The boy compelled to play the role of empress, who suffered years of emotional and physical torment, and who ultimately chose death rather than more disgrace. His story should be remembered not merely as a strange footnote in Roman history, but as a reflection of both human brutality and perseverance. In choosing to end his life, Sporus reclaimed the single freedom that had been denied to him throughout adulthood, the right to decide his own destiny. His life serves as a reminder that behind every grand imperial chronicle lie personal stories of pain and endurance that merit our attention and empathy, even across the divide of 2 millennia.